So our mission today is really focused. We're diving into the pretty intense diplomatic friction between the U.S. and Israel right now, specifically looking at President Trump's big push for this post-war Gaza peace plan. We've got sources suggesting this isn't just, typical policy disagreement. It feels more like a head-on confrontation.
Yeah, it really is a critical moment. You've got President Trump heading into this White House meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he's bringing this very, very specific U.S.-backed peace proposal with him. On one hand, you hear Trump sounding quite optimistic, actually, saying the plan is very close.
But Netanyahu is still saying publicly, very forcefully, that the military campaign continues until Hamas is, quote, totally eliminated.
Yeah.
Complete opposite messages.
Exactly.
Total opposites. And this is where our sources paint a really stark picture. The official U.S. view, according to senior administration officials, is getting quite personal. They're describing Netanyahu as increasingly isolated, not just on the world stage, but even within Israel. I mean, to hear a senior U.S. official actually say, and this is a direct quote, Bibi is on his own island. Not just from us, from his own government. That's not your standard diplomatic talk, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. That kind of blunt language really signals that the U.S. thinks Netanyahu might be operating from a position of, well, weakness rather than strength. So this deep dive is really about understanding that calculation. What happens when a leader, perceived as isolated, faces a detailed peace plan that challenges his war aims, maybe even his political future?
Okay, so to really grasp the pressure Netanyahu's under, you need the details of that plan. Let's get into Section 1, decoding the peace plan. It's apparently a huge document, this 21-point plan, but we've boiled it down to maybe 5 core pillars that seem to directly challenge Netanyahu's strategy.
And the weight behind it is significant. This isn't just some academic paper. Key figures were involved in crafting it. Jared Kushner, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. This is a serious diplomatic effort. It's designed to push for real structural change.
Right. Let's walk through those 5 points. The first 2 seem pretty standard immediate needs, right? Pillar 1, a permanent ceasefire. Pillar 2, the immediate return of all hostages. Essential stuff.
Absolutely essential. Non-negotiable, really.
Yeah.
But then the plan gets into the more complex day-after scenario with the next 3 pillars. Pillar 3 calls for setting up an international trusteeship for Gaza.
An international trusteeship.
Yes. The idea is clearly to avoid a power vacuum, stopping either a full Israeli reoccupation or Hamas just coming back into control.
Okay, but that trusteeship idea, that must be a huge sticking point for the Israeli security side. No, I mean, if the plan calls for some external security mandate, doesn't that hit right at the core of their objectives?
Oh, absolutely. That's arguably the biggest friction point in the whole document. The current Israeli government, especially Netanyahu's hardline partners, insist on total demilitarization of Gaza under their security control. The idea of handing over control, even just temporarily, to some international body, it's seen as a violation of sovereignty, a massive security risk. Frankly, for his current coalition, that pillar alone probably makes the plan politically impossible.
Okay, so major friction there. Then the last 2 points look at the bigger political picture. Pillar 4, an explicit no to Israeli annexation of the West Bank. That's a clear U.S. position stated there.
A very clear red line. And Pillar 5 lays out a path towards eventual Palestinian reunification, but under what they're calling a technocratic executive committee linked to the Palestinian Authority.
A technocratic executive committee. Why that specific phrasing? What does technocratic signal here?
Well, it seems deliberately chosen. It signals a break from the, let's say, established Palestinian Authority structure. It's trying to move away from perceptions of past corruption or the old guard associated with Fatah. The aim seems to be to install a body that regional players like the Gulf states and maybe Europe could actually support and work with. Professionals, experts.
So it's not just about working with the PA as it is, it's more like a reform package, something designed to attract international funding and get buy-in from moderate Arab states.
That seems to be exactly the idea. It paints this very detailed picture of what the day after could look like institutionally. But by doing that, it directly clashes with Netanyahu's very public commitment to keep fighting until, as he says, total victory. And that fundamental conflict is why things are so tense right now.
Speaking of tense, that leads us right into the recent events that have really cranked up the heat, the specific flashpoints. Let's move to Section 2, looking at these incidents that have made this upcoming meeting feel, well, almost toxic.
Yeah, we definitely have to talk about the Doha strike incident from earlier this month. Israel carried out a strike targeting Hamas officials who were in Doha, Qatar.
Right, and the sources we have suggest this wasn't just like an operation that failed, it blew up into a diplomatic
It
crisis.
was a complete mess, frankly. First, tactically, the strike missed its targets. Didn't even achieve its military aim. But maybe more importantly, the sources indicate it was pushed through over the objections of some Israeli officials.
Wait, over objections? Officials who knew it was risky diplomatically.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Officials who understood the gravity of hitting targets in Qatar, which is, a key mediator in these sensitive talks. So it jeopardized the very peace talks Qatar was hosting.
That sounds counterproductive, to put it mildly. Missing the target, upsetting a key mediator, undermining your own talks. Why would they greenlight something like that, especially against internal advice? Sounds like shooting yourself in the foot.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some sources suggest it might have been a political move, maybe aimed at showing toughness to the public back home in Israel, possibly overriding the diplomatic concerns. But whatever the reason, the fallout for U.S. diplomacy was immediate and severe. President Trump apparently had to personally apologize to a key Qatari leader.
Wow, that's a major diplomatic cleanup operation. How did the U.S. officials describe Trump's reaction personally, having to make that call?
One official described the strike as, quote, a mistake you can't afford to make, end quote. And the word used for the subsequent phone call between Trump and Netanyahu was heated. Sources suggest that's putting it mildly.
Heated.
Okay. This wasn't just, polite diplomatic disagreement. This was reportedly a full-on dressing down. The feeling was that Netanyahu had basically ignored U.S. interests and slapped the diplomatic team in the face while they were trying to broker a deal. Volcanic was another word used to describe the call.
Okay, volcanic. That level of personal anger definitely spills over into policy, doesn't it? Like with the West Bank annexation issue. Trump seemed to really harden his public line on that recently.
He did. He was very clear last week. Stated, and I'm quoting here, I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. There's been enough. It's time to stop now. That's a pretty significant public red line being drawn.
But hang on, if officials are also saying privately that this public statement was partly for, to look firm but leave room to negotiate, won't Netanyahu just see that as, well, more U.S. pressure he can probably ride out like he's done before?
That's the tightrope they're walking. It's a classic leverage game. The U.S. probably needs that strong public statement to reassure allies, especially in the region, that they're serious about preventing annexation, maybe serious about a two-state path eventually. But they also need Netanyahu to actually consider this peace plan so they can't completely slam the door shut privately. It's a really tricky carrot-and-stick approach. High risk.
That tension really sets the stage for Section 3, Netanyahu's isolation. Because all this is happening while his international standing seems to be just cratering during this nearly 2-year Gaza war.
Yeah, the evidence for his isolation is pretty stark, and it's coming from all directions. You've got widespread global condemnation, including that UN report, which used language like genocide to describe aspects of Israel's campaign.
And it's affecting him personally, too, right? The sources mention his travel plans.
That's quite striking, the fact that he's reportedly been avoiding flying over mainland Europe because he fears being arrested by the International Criminal Court, the ICC. I mean, when a head of state has to reroute flights because of potential arrest warrants, that signals a really deep rupture with the international legal system.
So you've got legal threats from the ICC, political condemnation at the UN. Remember those walkouts during his speech at the General Assembly?
Right, that defiant speech.
And now this direct policy clash with the U.S., his most important ally. It feels like a coordinated squeeze from all sides.
It does look like a full-court press, but Netanyahu seems, well, either willing to endure this isolation or perhaps gambling that he can outlast it to achieve his military goals. Which really raises a key question about U.S. policy itself. If the administration is this frustrated, why haven't we seen more direct leverage, like conditioning military aid on specific actions?
That's the big paradox here, isn't it? It points to these contradictions in U.S. policy. Despite all the frustration, all the heated phone calls, the U.S. hasn't really done much to, say, stop the expansion of Israeli military operations in the West Bank or the settlement growth that continues there. It sends a very mixed message.
It really does. The U.S. is pushing this peace plan, yet arguably allowing actions on the ground like settlement expansion that many critics say make a viable Palestinian state and therefore peace harder and harder to achieve. So why the contradiction? It's likely a mix of domestic political considerations in the U.S. and trying to maintain some kind of leverage, however strained.
You mean keeping that key pro-Israel base happy back home while trying to manage the crisis abroad?
I think that's a big part of it. Look at how Trump also recently warned U.S. allies against recognizing a Palestinian state right now. He called that move tantamount to rewarding Hamas.
Hmm.
So it's like trying to thread a needle, pressure Netanyahu diplomatically towards this U.S. plan, but also shield him from international pressure on the statehood question. It's a very fine line.
Which brings us neatly to our final section, Section 4, the peacemaker dilemma and the very uncertain outcome here. Because despite all the friction, the anger, the volcanic calls, the isolation, Trump still seems reluctant to actually label Netanyahu a pariah. He keeps positioning himself as a potential deal maker, the one who can broker peace.
Right, that self-image as the ultimate deal maker is crucial. It shapes how he approaches this meeting. But critics are warning that this image, this potential legacy, is being undermined by the very contradictions in policy that we've been talking about.
We saw particularly sharp comments on this from Richard Haass, former head of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah, Haas put it very bluntly. He said Trump, quote, fancies himself a peacemaker, but what he is tolerating jeopardizes what little possibility is left of creating a Palestinian state, as well as expanding the Abraham Accords. Essentially arguing the U.S. approach is walking this dangerous line demanding peace while simultaneously allowing actions that might make peace impossible.
So, okay, you have all these factors converging on this one meeting. The detailed plan, the lingering anger over the Doha strike, the public red line on annexation, an Israeli leader who seems increasingly isolated but also defiant. What's the official read on how this summit might actually go?
The official read seems to be just profound uncertainty. One administration official basically laid out the two extremes. They said Trump is going to try to get him to agree to some terms, but it could also go off the rails. Given Netanyahu's track record of defiance and the current level of tension, yeah, either outcome feels entirely possible. It could be a breakthrough or it could be a blow-up.
So wrapping up this deep dive, what we've really uncovered is this fundamental clash. You have a comprehensive U.S. peace strategy hitting up against an Israeli leader who seems deeply isolated, yet calculates that continuing the fight is politically safer for him than agreeing to diplomatic terms. And Pacific recent events like that disastrous Doha strike have just poured fuel on the fire right before this critical meeting.
Exactly. The core takeaway is that Trump's trying to cut a deal with a leader who appears willing to risk almost total international isolation if he thinks it ensures his political survival back home.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to consider. When a political leader seems to believe that facing down global condemnation, ICC threats, even the fury of his most powerful ally, is actually a safer political bet than signing on to a peace plan, what leverage does the U.S. really have left? Short of a complete break, what tool can possibly force compliance in that scenario? Something to think about. Thanks for joining the deep dive.